Critics say Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was confused. That first, he praised Jews and Christians, then suddenly turned against them. That he once saw Christians as allies, but later condemned them in the Quran. They want you to believe he was playing politics. That the Quran is a scattered, reactionary book, changing with the Prophet's mood. But here's what they don't want you to see: the context, the events, the betrayals, and the verses that paint a very different picture. One of consistent truth, not flip-flopping confusion. Let's watch their clip, and then I'll show you the facts they're hiding.
The transition that we see is, again, first, it's from the Islamic perspective, it's Muslims, Jews, and Christians against the polytheists.
Yes.
Then he started having problems with it because he was around more Jews when he went to Medina. There were three Jewish tribes there. And he still seemed to think that the Christians were going to eventually side with him. So we have, I'll just read Surah 5, verse 82, which is in that transitional period where he still seemed to think that the Christians were going to confirm him. But it says, Surah 5, verse 82, strongest among men in enmity to the believers wilt thou find the Jews and pagans, and nearest among them in love to the believers wilt thou find those who say, we are Christians. So here it's pagans and polytheists, pagans and Jews united against Christians and Muslims. Like Muslims and Christians are going to be on the same side against the Jews and the polytheists, and that doesn't last either.
Actually, in the verse, when he continues later on, he says, those who cry when
we cry when we hear the Quran revelations.
It means like they are sympathizing with him. He found some people who are sympathizing with him. He only praised those ones, actually.
Yeah. And so, but what's interesting, you can imagine why people would do that, right? If they're surrounded in a polytheistic culture, and then someone comes along and he's praising Jesus and Mary.
They're talking about God and nature, how God created heaven.
And you'd say, oh my goodness, it's so great that someone down here is saying this.
Finally.
And suddenly, Christians, Christians are united with us in love, and that didn't last very long.
Let's unpack the accusation. David claims Surah 5:82 shows that Prophet Muhammad was still hopeful toward Christians, even after turning against Jews. And then he says, that didn't last either. It's a nice little story, but it's fiction. Surah 5:82 doesn't say Muslims and Christians are allies against Jews and polytheists. Let's read it properly. You will surely find the most intense of the people in animosity toward the believers to be the Jews and those who associate others with Allah, polytheists. And you will find the nearest of them in affection to the believers, those who say, we are Christians. That is because among them are priests and monks, and because they are not arrogant. The verse never praises Christians as a whole. It praises a group among them, those sincere monks and priests who cried when they heard the Quran and accepted its truth. This verse is not a political alliance. It's a recognition of sincerity and humility wherever it exists. Just like the Quran praises Jews who truly follow the Torah, indeed, those who were guided by Allah among the children of Israel, Surah 32:24. It condemns those among Jews and Christians who corrupted their scriptures and rejected truth out of arrogance. But it honors those who remained sincere. The message is consistent, not political. To understand the verse, you need to understand the event that led to it. This verse was revealed when a Christian delegation from Najran came to Medina. They were welcomed by the Prophet, peace be upon him, allowed to stay in the mosque, and engaged in peaceful, intellectual dialogue. One of the companions, Ibn Ishaq, narrated, they cried when they heard the recitation of the Quran. Another incident involved the king of Abyssinia, the Christian ruler who gave refuge to early Muslims. When Ja'far ibn Abi Talib recited verses about Jesus and Mary, the king wept and said, this and what Jesus brought come from the same source of light. These were the Christians praised in Surah 5:82, not because they were Christian, but because they were sincere seekers of truth. The Quran doesn't judge people based on labels. It judges based on sincerity. David tries to create a timeline like this. First, Muhammad loved Jews and Christians. Then he turned against Jews, then against Christians. This is historical fantasy. Let's lay out the real timeline. In Makkah, Muslims faced persecution. The Prophet spoke about previous prophets and honored Jews and Christians as people of the book. He encouraged unity on monotheism. In Medina, he signed the Constitution of Medina, granting Jews full religious freedom. He treated Christians with respect, welcomed them in his mosque, and praised the just king of Abyssinia. So what changed? Not the message. What changed were people's reactions to that message. Jewish tribes in Medina broke their treaties, plotted assassinations, and allied with the Quraysh. This was political betrayal, not theological disagreement. But Christians who were sincere, like Najashi, remained respected throughout. And this proves that the Prophet, peace be upon him, and never made blanket judgments. His response was always based on truth and justice, not emotion. Islam's view of Jews and Christians is balanced and consistent. They are people of the book, recipients of previous divine revelation. Those who distort or reject the truth are warned. Those who remain sincere, humble, and recognize the message are praised. This is why the Quran says in Surah 2:62, "Indeed, those who believed and those who were Jews or Christians or Sabaeans, whoever believes in Allah and the last day and does righteousness, shall have their reward with their Lord." But what do critics do? They take one verse, strip away the context, and build a twisted theory. They ignore that even in Surah 5, Allah still says, "And do not argue with the people of the book, except in a way that is best, unless it be those who commit injustice among them." Islam never said all Jews or Christians are evil. It said some are righteous, some are corrupt, just like every other group. That's not hatred, that's reality. So why does David want you to believe that Prophet Muhammad turned on Jews and Christians? Because if he admits that the Prophet acted based on justice and truth, his entire argument falls apart. He wants to paint the Prophet as inconsistent. But the Prophet was consistent in faith, firm in justice, and fair to all sincere people. That's why he welcomed the Christian delegation of Najran. That's why he prayed for the Christian king of Abyssinia. That's why the Quran praises priests and monks, but condemns those who are arrogant and unjust, regardless of their label. So let's ask again, did the Prophet change, or did his critics just cherry-pick verses and ignore the entire historical record? The Quran doesn't flip-flop. It reflects real situations, real people, and real responses, always based on sincerity and justice. If this exposed another lie they've been hiding, like, share and comment what claim you want dismantled next. And always remember, the truth doesn't need to change, it just needs to be told. Assalamu alaikum.